In 1637, my favorite poet John Milton wrote an elegy to his friend Edward King. Titled Lycidas, Milton lamented a close friend of his who died drowning off the coast of the Irish Sea. Amongst a 193-line poem, in an attempt to memorialize his friend, Milton writes, "Bitter constraint and sad occasion dear compels me to disturb your season due. For Lycidas is dead, dead ere his prime, young Lycidas, and hath not left his peer. Who would not sing for Lycidas? He knew himself to sing, and build the lofty rhyme. He must not float upon his watery bier, unwhipped, and welter to the parching wind, without the meed of some melodious tear." Essentially, he's saying, man, this sucks. My friend Lycidas is dead, and he wasn't even close to peaking in life. He died young and didn't even leave an ancestor or a poetic equal. How could you not sing for this man? He could do it himself, but now he floats on his watery tomb. Therefore, it is I who must sing my tears. So yeah, Milton's mad, and Edward King hadn't even begun to peak. Poor guy. I know this sounds weird, but naturally, I couldn't help but have this poem reappear in my head over and over again when I heard the news that Gearbox's MOBA slash hero shooter slash loot and shoot was re-releasing the game with a free trial. A title that I thought was horribly ill thought out, but we'll get to that. Basically, Battleborn's multiplayer is now free to play, a la any other free to play MOBA. Lycidas is a pastoral elegy about loss, about mourning the loss of a good friend. Elegies are poems written in serious reflection about a lost person or place or thing. Frankly, I find it necessary to craft my own YouTube elegy for the lost soul of Battleborn. And this is pretty much a joke. So today, we're going to look at how Gearbox's Battleborn was sent to an early grave, and how we can begin to learn from its successes and failures. I'm David OZ, and this is Game Study. Here's where I'm going to tie in this poem. I have no delusion to think that Battleborn has no video game equal, like Lycidas had poetic equal. But I do believe that it is a game that was drowned in the most unfortunate of self-fulfilling circumstances, much like Lycidas. It is actually a good game. Truly, I believe that. But if you remember, Battleborn was released on the 3rd of May 2016. I need not remind you of what other hero shooter was released in May of 2016, but you can imagine the ramifications of such a clash. Thus, the game died. And it died early, way before it had time to identify itself, way before the developers knew how to approach a game such as Battleborn, and way before enough people were able to get a hold of the game. A year after its release, the game holds up well. Unfortunately, of course, a multiplayer game is dependent on its player base. The recent free-to-playification of the title caused me to return to it after having put almost 60 hours into it since release. If you don't remember the title, or its infamous notoriety on the internet, let me refresh you. The game has two components, a single-player campaign and a competitive multiplayer that pits 5 players against 5 players in 4 different modes. Incursion has you killing minions to get to the other team's sentries. This is a one-lane MOBA, and it's essentially the most MOBA-esque game mode. Meltdown, in my opinion, the most inventive, has each team guiding their minions into a giant mechanic mouth titled Minrek. All the while he is shouting what he plans on turning the minions into. Face-Off and Capture are 2 far more casual and deathmatch-oriented modes, which boil down to a kill-confirm type mode and a point-capture type mode, respectively. The multiplayer is made dynamic by a cast of almost 30 unique characters, all that come with their own set of weapons and skills. You start at level 1 at the start of each individual match. Killing minions and other players will grant you levels, in which you have the opportunity to select from up to 3 different mutations that allows you to gain passive or active abilities in the middle of a match. There's actually a lot of opportunity here to create some unique experiences from other hero shooters and MOBAs. I've played League, Smite, Dota, Paragons, and Overwatch, and none genre meld in the same way that Battleborn was able to. For better or for worse. Probably my favorite way Battleborn does this is actually the buildables on the map. Like other games, you get currency over the course of the match for accomplishing things, right? Yes, you can buy gear from a loadout that you chose, but you can also choose to build giant minion bots, shock turrets, healing stations, rocket turrets, acceleration stations, or recruit these giant shield minions from the corners of the map. It is up to you and your team to decide if rushing your items is the best move, or if you should focus on building turrets. In this way, Battleborn is closer to Monday Night Combat than, say, Smite. It is a MOBA in some senses, sure, but it's also a tower defense in others, and I guess a hero shooter in other ways. But you see, that's the point here. Battleborn is this amalgamation of a number of different genres, characters, and identities. If I had to guess, that has to be one of the reasons why the game died. And I'm not at all comfortable with saying that the proximity to Overwatch was the only reason the game died. And trust me, when I say the game died, I'm not exaggerating. Before the free-to-play, finding a game was a nightmare, and depending on when you would queue, it would be impossible. Well, as far as I know. I was queuing for 30 minutes at one point and did not get into one lobby. So yeah, the game has a bit of an identity crisis, and while I see this as interesting, I think others see it as a lack of commitment to a consistent goal, as if the game was half-assing multiple things poorly instead of whole-assing one thing well. This is actually noticeable in the balance of the game. Because of the way the game handles loot, it can be very easy for certain characters to become unstoppable. See, the game handles loot in the same way that its not so distant relative Borderlands does. Accomplishing things such as killing bosses, players, or completing quests can reward you with different tiers of rare loot. Such loot can increase your damage, your shield recharge rate, reload speed, and you understand. What this game means is that there is an enormous amount of variables to consider when balancing the game. In League of Legends, there are a set amount of items that are meticulously balanced by fractions of percents. In Battleborn, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of different items and variations of those items. Couple that with a particularly difficult to kill character, and you have a chance for an indestructible tank. I can't help but think that the shortcomings of this game are a symptom of the breadth of the game, resulting in artificial depth. A depth that is characterized more by quantity and not quality. The thing about Battleborn is, if you do decide to shoehorn it into certain genres, it just doesn't hold up in just that genre. See what I mean? Say you want to call Battleborn a hero shooter. Well, then it's obviously not as polished or competitive as Overwatch. Say you want to call Battleborn a MOBA. Well, it's obviously not as polished or intricate as League of Legends. Say you want to just call Battleborn an FPS. Well, it's obviously not as smooth or responsive of a game as like Counter-Strike. This is the plague of genre melding games, and I'm certain it did not help Battleborn. Furthermore, there is the ever-present peculiar case of Gearbox software. Gearbox has developed about as many bad reputations as it has video games, some justified, others not. I don't feel it necessary, but if you actually don't know what I'm referring to, Google Gearbox Alien Colonial Marines. The important thing here, though, is that people don't like Gearbox. I like Gearbox. Millions of people like Gearbox. But holy crap, are there some very loud people who do not like Gearbox. And if that wasn't enough, think about what game you think of when you think of Gearbox. Most would say Borderlands. I would say many who are sort of familiar with Borderlands and not at all familiar with Battleborn would think that Battleborn was a Borderlands hero shooter. Why didn't they do that? There's the art style, the first-person perspective, the obnoxiously cringy humor that I guess sometimes lands, and of course, the art style. This is important because both sides lose. The Gearbox haters see Battleborn and can immediately identify it as Gearbox, regardless of the game's content. There's no chance. Gearbox lovers, on the other hand, immediately see it as less Borderlands, or maybe a lesser Borderlands. They see it as resources that could have gone to Borderlands 3. Again, this is the plague of a game with such a cult following. So not only do people not trust Gearbox, but they see a game that does not align with any specific genre, but instead glides by multiple genres briefly. Couple that with the titan of a developer that it was competing with, and I hope you can see better as to why the game fell so quickly. So why make this video now, over a year after Battleborn's release? Well, like I mentioned earlier, Battleborn may rise again, actually much like Lycidas did. Battleborn is now free to play. But again, in an almost poetic metaphor for the game itself, with everything good involving Battleborn, something must also be bad. In an attempt to preserve his pride, and I see no other explanation for this, Randy Pitchford, CEO of Gearbox, titled the new update to Battleborn the Free Trial, resulting in many of players not wanting to download tens of gigs of data for a game for a timed trial. I would ask you, what do you think when you hear free trial? A time limit? I mean, that's what I think, and apparently many others. My only guess could be that because Pitchford had always said that Battleborn would never go free to play, that he manipulated words in order to deflect judgment. I'm hesitant to find any other justification because free trial conveys a much different product than the one given. You can begin to understand why I see the poetry in this. We have this soul, this genuinely good thing being drowned by itself in its surroundings. After being given the opportunity for rebirth, it still cannot learn from its mortal, prideful ways. In Milton's poem, Lycidas is reborn in heaven. He writes, "At last he rose, and twitched his mantle blue. Tomorrow to fresh woods and pastures new." I can only hope the same for Battleborn, a game that I genuinely enjoy and I wish to see succeed. Hopefully Battleborn's story can end up more like Lycidas. Man, this was some of the nerdiest stuff I've ever written. But it was a fun little joke and it was fun for me. I'm glad you enjoyed. I imagine I'm going to switch between game study and my longer form types of video game analysis in the future. There are examples of both on my channel if you're new, and I would really appreciate you checking them out. I'd recorded a full playthrough and began writing my script for Nier Automata, but ran into some irreparable tech issues on that game. I'm really frustrated. I'll have to revisit that game again for an analysis later. I ended up finishing it, but unfortunately I can't make a game, so my next long form analysis should be a while from now. I think I know what game I want to do next. Put in the comments if you want me to share that with you or if you want me to just post it. Again, thank you for watching and listening to this little channel update at the end here. The support means a lot. Please subscribe and like the video, then say hello on my Twitter or Twitch stream. It's all down below. Have a great night, guys.